When Laura says yes, he vows to protect their new peace. But his mother demands a reunion with the brother who once stole everything. As the wedding nears, old wounds reopen. He must choose. Draw a line that holds or surrender the life he's finally learned to breathe in. When Laura said yes to my proposal, it felt like the world had finally stopped moving long enough for me to catch my breath. We had been together for 4 years, and in that time she had become the calm I never knew I needed. She was patient and funny and had this quiet way of making any place feel like home. After years of messy family situations and too many broken friendships, I had finally built something stable and real with her. Planning the wedding felt like sealing that stability into something permanent. What I didn't expect was how much my family, especially my mother, would find new ways to turn peace into a negotiation. I grew up in a family that looked normal from the outside but thrived on silent dysfunction. We didn't fight at the dinner table, but we let resentment sit there until it hardened into something no one wanted to touch. My mother believed keeping the peace was more important than being honest. She would rather twist herself into emotional knots than admit someone had done something wrong. And when I tried to draw lines, she treated those lines like personal insults. That became painfully clear years ago because of my older brother Ryan. When we were kids, he was my hero. He could fix anything and always made sure I got the first pick of Halloween candy. Things stayed good until college. During my junior year, I started dating a girl named Mia who I thought I would end up marrying. We had been together for 3 years and had talked about our future the way young people do when they still believe love is enough to make sense of everything. Then one night, I got a message from a friend who said she had seen Ryan and Mia together at a bar across town. I brushed it off at first, thinking it must be a misunderstanding. It wasn't. What started as suspicion turned into discovery. It wasn't a one-time mistake but a full affair. They had been seeing each other for months. When I confronted them, Ryan didn't deny it. He didn't even look ashamed. He just said that Mia had come to him for advice and things got complicated. Mia tried to talk, but all I heard was Ryan's voice saying if she cheated on me, maybe it was because I wasn't giving her what she needed. That single sentence changed something fundamental in me. I packed my things that night and drove back to campus in silence. I didn't speak to Ryan again after that day. My mother reacted like it was some petty argument between brothers. She called it a misunderstanding and said things like brothers shouldn't hold grudges because family is forever. She kept insisting that men make mistakes and I should be the bigger person. I tried explaining that it wasn't about jealousy or competition but about betrayal. She didn't want to hear it. To her, forgiveness was more valuable than boundaries. Over time, I realized she would never take my side no matter how much I explained what it did to me. So I stopped explaining. Years passed. I built a new life. I met Laura. She never asked me to talk about my brother, though she knew something was broken there. She had this way of respecting silence without trying to fill it. When we started planning our wedding, I made one thing clear. Ryan wouldn't be invited. It wasn't about revenge. It was about protecting peace. I wanted the day to be about love, not old wounds. But when my mother found out, she treated it like a moral scandal. She said excluding Ryan would make the family look bad. When I told her I didn't care about appearances, she acted as if I had personally declared war. She called almost every day asking if I'd changed my mind. When guilt didn't work, she switched to emotional blackmail. She said if Ryan wasn't invited, she might not come either because she couldn't take sides between her sons. Hearing that hit harder than I expected. I told her I needed time to think, which was mostly a lie to buy myself some quiet. Instead of sending Ryan an invitation, I wrote him a letter. I told him I didn't hate him, but I couldn't pretend what he did never happened. I explained that the wedding was about trust and joy, and having him there would only drag old ghosts into the room. I ended the letter by saying I wished him peace, but I needed my own too. Ryan replied with a short message that sounded more like an accusation than a response. He said I was immature for holding on to something from so long ago. He said family should be unconditional and that I was choosing pride over love. My mother called later the same night, crying about how Ryan was devastated and how she couldn't believe I would tear the family apart over a mistake from our youth. I tried not to let it ruin me, but it did. The closer the wedding got, the more I felt that old guilt crawl back. Part of me wanted to fix things just to quiet the noise. The other part knew that if I gave in now, it would never stop. Laura told me she trusted me to do what was right for my peace of mind, and that if my mother couldn't accept my boundaries, it was her loss, not mine. She was right, but it didn't make it easier. When the day finally came, Ryan wasn't there. My mother showed up, but she kept her distance during the ceremony, barely making eye contact. Still, the moment Laura walked down the aisle, everything else fell away. The day went smoothly. The laughter felt real. The world was small and safe again for the first time in years. But peace has a short half-life in my family. A few days later, Ryan started posting vague messages online about forgiveness and family betrayal. My mother sent me long texts filled with guilt and disappointment. Aunts and cousins joined in with opinions no one asked for. Part of me felt like the bad guy all over again. But another part of me for once felt sure that doing the right thing sometimes means being misunderstood. And yet late at night, when the house is quiet, I can't help wondering if standing my ground really brought peace, or if I just built another wall that will never come down. In the weeks after the wedding, I thought the noise would fade. I kept telling myself that time would do its job and my family would eventually grow tired of trying to guilt me into reconciliation. For a little while it even seemed that way. The calls slowed down and the messages stopped. I started to believe the worst had passed. Laura and I were settling into married life the way you ease into warm water after a long day, cautious at first and then gradually comfortable. We unpacked the last of the boxes in our new apartment, hung pictures on the wall, and tried to pretend the world outside our door didn't exist. Then one morning I woke up to an email from my mother. The subject line simply said, "Please read." It was long even for her. She wrote about how much she loved me, how proud she was of the man I had become, and then slipped into a paragraph about Ryan. She said she had seen him the previous weekend and that he had been quiet and withdrawn. She said he missed me. She asked me to think about the kind of family I wanted my children to grow up in and whether I would want them to see their father as someone who held grudges. The letter was full of emotional traps disguised as affection. By the time I finished reading it, my chest felt heavy, like I had swallowed something sharp. Laura found me staring at the screen and asked if it was my mother again. I nodded. She didn't say much. She never tried to tell me what to do when it came to my family. She just poured coffee and sat beside me, letting silence fill the space where advice might have gone. Sometimes silence was more grounding than words. Later that week, my mother sent another message, this time forwarding something Ryan had posted online. It was a long status about forgiveness, written in the kind of tone that begged for sympathy. He wrote that life was too short to hate your own blood, and that he wished some people could find it in their hearts to move on. There were dozens of comments underneath from relatives praising him for his maturity. Reading it felt like being punched through a screen. My mother added a single line at the end of her message saying, "See, he's trying." I didn't reply, but ignoring her didn't mean peace. Each day she found new ways to slip Ryan into conversation. She would text me pictures from family dinners saying things like, "Wish you were here, your brother made his famous chili." Sometimes she would call under the pretense of checking in on Laura and me, but somehow the topic would always shift. She would talk about how Ryan was doing better at work, or how lonely he seemed lately, or how she feared he might never forgive himself if I didn't reach out. It was always about him, never about me. The strange thing was that part of me wanted to reach out, if only to end the tension. Not to reconcile, but to close the chapter. I drafted several messages and deleted them all. There's a particular kind of exhaustion that comes from being the one who was wronged yet still expected to fix everything. It makes you question whether your peace is worth the silence it costs. A few days later, my mother sent another email, only this time it wasn't just guilt. She said she wanted to host a family dinner at her house to celebrate my marriage properly, since she hadn't been able to enjoy the wedding. She said she had already spoken to Ryan and that he had agreed to come if I did. The way she worded it made it sound like some grand diplomatic effort, as though our reconciliation was a public event rather than a private wound. I could almost hear her voice saying how proud she'd be if her sons could sit at the same table again. Laura read the message over my shoulder and asked how I felt about it. I told her the truth, I didn't know. Part of me wanted to refuse immediately just to make a point. But another part of me wondered if maybe attending could buy me peace in the long run. If facing Ryan once could stop the endless campaigning from my mother, maybe it was worth the discomfort. So I said yes. The night of the dinner, the air felt too thick. My mother greeted us with the kind of forced cheerfulness that comes from desperation. She had decorated the dining room with candles, and a banner that said, "Family First." I almost laughed at how on the nose it was. Ryan arrived a few minutes later carrying a bottle of wine and a look that I couldn't read. We shook hands out of politeness. His grip was firm but his eyes darted away. Dinner was quiet at first. My mother kept trying to steer the conversation toward safe topics. Weather, work, sports. Every time there was a pause, she filled it with nervous laughter. Ryan mostly kept his head down, focusing on his plate. I waited for him to say something meaningful, but he didn't. Eventually my mother excused herself to get dessert, and that's when Ryan finally spoke. He said he hoped we could start over. His voice was calm, rehearsed even. He said he regretted what happened back then, but we were young and stupid and shouldn't let it define our relationship. I wanted to believe him, but there was something off about the way he said it, like someone reading from a script written by someone else. He didn't mention Mia by name or acknowledge the way his choices had dismantled my trust. He just kept talking about moving forward as if skipping the past would make it less real. When we left that night, Laura asked what I thought. I told her it felt like shaking hands with a ghost. I didn't feel anger anymore, just emptiness. I wasn't sure if that was progress or just another kind of numbness. The next morning my mother called to thank me for coming. She said I had made her proud. She also said Ryan wanted to invite us to his house for dinner next week. Apparently his girlfriend wanted to meet us. I told her I'd think about it, though deep down I already knew the answer. Peace was supposed to feel lighter than this, but somehow every time I tried to hold it kept slipping through my fingers. A week after that uneasy dinner at my mother's house, I woke up to another message from her that made my stomach twist before I even opened it. She had sent a photo of Ryan and me from when we were kids, sitting in the backyard covered in mud, grinning like fools after building a makeshift fort. Underneath the picture she wrote, "You two used to be inseparable. I know deep down you still love him." That single sentence was enough to pull me straight back into the swamp of old guilt she always managed to stir. Laura found me sitting at the table staring at my phone like it might explode. She asked if I was okay, and I told her it was nothing, just my mother being my mother. But she knew it wasn't nothing. She could see it in the way I kept rubbing the edge of my coffee mug like I was trying to wear a groove into it. She didn't push, though. That was the thing about her. She never pushed. Later that day my mother called to ask if Laura and I would be attending dinner at Ryan's place the following weekend. I told her we were busy, which wasn't even a lie since Laura and I had planned a small trip out of town just to get away. My mother sighed dramatically into the phone and said, "I just wish you would stop punishing him." Then she said Ryan had been telling her he wanted to make things right and that I was too stubborn to let him. I didn't respond because anything I said would have started a new argument. But after I hung up the phone, the words stayed in my head. Too stubborn to let him. I wanted to scream that I wasn't the one who ruined things, that I was the one who was left to pick up what he broke. Yet saying that to my mother would have been pointless because she had decided long ago that both of us were equally responsible for keeping the family together. When Laura and I went away for that weekend, it was supposed to be a break from everything, but my mind wouldn't stay quiet. I kept replaying Ryan's words from that dinner about being young and stupid. I tried to figure out if he actually felt remorse or if he just wanted the appearance of forgiveness. Maybe both. I couldn't tell anymore. There's a strange heaviness that comes when you realize someone's apology isn't meant for you, but for their own comfort. We stayed in a small cabin by a lake where the air smelled like pine and the nights were so still you could hear the water move. Laura spent most of the time sketching by the window while I wandered the trails trying to clear my head. One evening we sat on the porch watching the sun dip below the trees, and she said quietly that maybe peace didn't have to look like reconciliation. Maybe it could just mean accepting that some bridges are better left as ruins. I wanted to believe that, but part of me still felt chained to the idea that family should be fixable. When we got back home, there were 2 voicemails waiting on my phone. One from my mother and one from Ryan. My mother's was a long emotional ramble about how Ryan had been asking about me again and how much it would mean to her if I'd give him another chance. Ryan's message was shorter. He said he wanted to grab a drink and talk, just the 2 of us. No pressure, his words exactly. The idea of sitting across from him again made my stomach tighten, but ignoring him felt like inviting more interference from my mother. So I agreed to meet him. We met at a quiet bar downtown on a Wednesday evening when the place was nearly empty. Ryan looked older than I remembered, but not older in the way that comes from age. older in the way people look when life hasn't gone the way they planned. His hair was thinner, his posture slumped. When he smiled, it was forced. He started talking almost immediately about work and about how he'd been trying to turn things around. I let him talk because it was easier than responding. Eventually, he shifted to the subject we were both avoiding. He said he still thought about that time in college and how stupid he had been. Then he said something that caught me completely off guard. He claimed that Mia had reached out to him recently. He said she was married now with 2 kids and had apologized for everything that happened. He told me this like it was supposed to make me feel better, as if her apology to him somehow canceled the damage done to me. I asked him what exactly she had said, but he couldn't remember her words, only that she regretted hurting people. Then he said he wished I would stop holding on to resentment because life was too short. He said it in a tone that made me feel like a lecture was coming. I told him I wasn't holding on to resentment, I was holding on to lessons. I told him forgiveness isn't something you can demand, it's something that grows in its own time, and sometimes it doesn't grow at all. He nodded slowly, but his eyes flickered like he didn't really hear me. We parted on neutral terms. I shook his hand again and walked out into the night feeling hollow. It wasn't anger that followed me home that evening, it was disappointment. Not just in him, but in myself for expecting anything different. When I got home, Laura was reading on the couch. I told her how it went, and she just nodded and said she was proud of me for facing him. But as I lay in bed later, I realized facing him hadn't given me closure. It had only stirred something else, an uneasy curiosity about what my mother had really been telling him behind the scenes. Because from the way he spoke, it was clear he thought I was the one clinging to the past. And that made me wonder who exactly had been rewriting the story all these years and how much of my mother's version of it had shaped what Ryan believed. I had a feeling that the truth between us was about to get even more complicated. The following weekend my mother called again, and I almost didn't answer, but guilt has a way of pressing the accept button for you. She sounded unusually cheerful and said she was happy I had met with Ryan. Her tone had that quiet smugness she used whenever she thought she had orchestrated something successful. She said Ryan told her it went well and that he could finally feel our relationship healing. I didn't bother correcting her. It wasn't worth the effort to explain that the only thing that healed that night was my hope that things might ever return to normal. Then she said something that made me sit up straighter. She said she had something to show me. When I asked what she meant, she told me she had found something while cleaning out her old boxes. She said it was about Ryan and Mia and that maybe it would help me see things differently. She told me to come by her house that evening. Laura didn't want me to go. She had this instinct about my mother that I have learned to trust. But I went anyway because curiosity is dangerous like that. When I arrived, my mother had a stack of envelopes on the kitchen table. She said they were old letters Mia had written years ago during the time I was still with her. My mother claimed Ryan had given them to her for safekeeping after everything fell apart. I didn't even want to touch them, but she pushed them toward me and said maybe I'd find closure in reading them. Against my better judgment, I opened one. It was dated from the middle of that awful year. The handwriting was unmistakable. The first few lines were about how confused she felt about her feelings and how she had never meant to hurt me. But then came a part that made my chest tighten. She wrote that she had fallen for Ryan before anything physical ever happened and that she believed he understood her in a way I never did. She said he had told her I was too focused on my own ambitions and that I'd stopped listening to her months before. I could feel the heat rise in my face as I read it. It wasn't the betrayal that hurt anymore. It was realizing that while I'd been trying to move on for years, my mother and Ryan had been holding on to this secret set of letters like some twisted justification. I asked her why she had kept them, and she said she thought it would help me forgive him one day. She said the letters proved that it wasn't malicious, that it was just human weakness. She said I should see that Ryan never meant to destroy me. I told her keeping these letters all this time wasn't about forgiveness. It was about control. She didn't like that. Her face changed the way it always did when she felt accused. She said I was twisting her intentions and that she had only ever wanted peace. Then she said something that finally snapped whatever patience I had left. She said maybe if I had been more attentive to Mia, none of it would have happened. It was strange how quiet the house got after she said that. Even the hum of the refrigerator seemed to stop. I looked at her and for a second I didn't recognize her at all. I told her I was done trying to make her understand and that this was the last time I'd talk about Ryan or Mia ever again. I left before she could say another word. On the drive home, my thoughts were scattered, but one thing was clear. Ryan hadn't come to me on his own. My mother had pushed him to reach out. And those letters weren't a coincidence. She had planned this entire chain of events hoping it would force a reunion. Maybe she even thought she was doing the right thing. But the truth was she didn't care about what it cost me. That night I told Laura everything. She listened quietly and then asked me a question I hadn't considered. She said maybe Ryan didn't even know about the letters. Maybe my mother had been using them as leverage without him realizing it. The idea settled into my mind and refused to leave. The next morning I decided to find out. I texted Ryan asking if we could meet again. He agreed right away. We met at a park this time. I asked him directly if he knew about the letters. He looked confused and said no. When I told him my mother had shown them to me, he went pale. He said he didn't even remember Mia writing to him that much and that he had burned what she sent after everything blew up. Then he told me something that made my stomach drop. He said our mother had told him years ago that I still hated him because I thought he had stolen Mia out of spite. He said she told him she believed the affair was more Mia's fault than his, but that I refused to listen. He said our mother had spent years trying to convince him that I was too proud to forgive him even though she had told me the opposite, that he was the one too stubborn to apologize. It hit me then how long she had been weaving two different versions of the same story, feeding each of us just enough guilt to keep us under her thumb. She didn't want reconciliation, she wanted control over both of us. Ryan sat there looking stunned, like a curtain had just been pulled back on something he had never questioned. For the first time since college, he actually looked remorseful, not in that practiced way from before, but genuinely shaken. He said he was sorry for what he did, but also sorry for how she had made things worse. I believed him. For the first time, I actually did. When I got home, Laura said I looked lighter. I told her maybe I finally understood the real source of the problem. It wasn't just about betrayal anymore. It was about the story my mother had been telling all these years. But even though some truth had come out that day, I knew it wasn't the end. Because if my mother could twist things for this long, I had to wonder how far she'd go now that her control was slipping. After that meeting in the park, my thoughts didn't quiet down like I hoped they would. Ryan's face kept replaying in my mind, that mixture of guilt and disbelief that only comes when someone finally realizes they have been manipulated. For years I had painted him as the villain and Mom as the desperate peacemaker. Now it was obvious she had been playing both sides. She wasn't trying to fix us, she was trying to keep us orbiting around her guilt-driven version of family harmony. I didn't tell her that Ryan and I had spoken again. I needed time to process what came next. Laura could tell I was deep in thought, but she gave me the space I needed. Every night after dinner, she would light a candle and sit beside me quietly while I sorted through the jumble of feelings. It was strange how the anger that had defined so many years of my life now felt replaced by something colder and clearer. Understanding doesn't erase pain, but it makes it easier to carry. A few days later, I got another message from my mother. It was shorter than usual, just a note saying she wanted to see me for dinner. No talk of Ryan, no guilt, no flowery words. Against better judgment, I agreed. I thought maybe she wanted to talk honestly this time. Laura warned me not to go alone, but I told her I would keep it short. When I arrived, Mom was already setting the table. She smiled in that polite way people do when they are about to ask for something. The house smelled like roast chicken and lemon cleaner. I sat down and waited for the real reason she had called me. It didn't take long. She said she had heard that I had been talking to Ryan again and that she was happy about it. The way she said happy sounded more like relieved. Then she started to say how proud she was that I was finally being the bigger person. That phrase always made my stomach tighten. I asked her why she had told Ryan that I hated him, and she froze mid-motion. Her fork clinked against the plate. She asked where I heard that. I told her Ryan and I had compared stories and that we both knew she had been saying different things to each of us for years. Her face shifted from shock to defensiveness in seconds. She said I was twisting things again, that she had only ever told small white lies to protect our relationship. She insisted her intentions were pure, that she had never wanted to hurt anyone. She said she just wanted her family back together. I told her intentions didn't erase manipulation. I told her what she had done had kept both of us from moving on. She started crying the way she always did when cornered, soft trembling tears meant to reset the power dynamic. Then she said something that caught me off guard. She said she was scared of being left alone. She said after Dad died, Ryan and I were all she had, and she didn't know how to keep us close without controlling us. That was the first honest thing she had said in a long time. I felt my anger falter for a moment. I told her I understood that fear, but I couldn't keep living inside it. I told her love wasn't supposed to feel like guilt. She didn't answer. She just stared at her plate like it held the rest of the words she couldn't find. When I left that night, I didn't feel triumphant. I felt hollow but lighter somehow. For the first time, I didn't feel like I owed her forgiveness. I felt like I had finally drawn a real line that even she couldn't cross without admitting what she had done. 2 days later, Ryan called again. He said he had talked to Mom after my visit. She had confessed to some of what I said, though probably not all. He sounded tired but calm. He told me he wanted to take responsibility for his part too, that what he did years ago had been selfish beyond words, and that he had spent a long time trying not to think about it because it was easier than facing it. He said he wasn't asking for a relationship, just for some kind of understanding between us. I told him I didn't know if I could ever fully trust him again, but I also didn't want to keep carrying hatred. He said that was enough. For the first time in over a decade, our conversation ended without bitterness. I hung up and sat there for a long time, staring out the window, watching the streetlights flicker on. That weekend, Laura and I went to visit her parents. I hadn't realized how tense I had been until I was sitting in their backyard with a glass of iced tea, listening to the sound of crickets. No guilt, no manipulation, just people who loved each other quietly. It made me think about the kind of family Laura and I might build someday. One where love didn't come with conditions or tests. But peace in my family never stayed quiet for long. When we got back home, there was a letter in the mail addressed in my mother's handwriting. I almost threw it away, but something stopped me. Inside was a note saying she had decided to host a small family gathering the following week to celebrate moving forward. She said Ryan would be there and she hoped Laura and I would come too. There was something at the bottom that made my throat tighten. She wrote, "I know I've caused pain. Maybe I've always confused control for love. I'm trying to learn the difference." It was the first time she had admitted anything even close to wrongdoing. I didn't know if it was genuine or another performance, but it was enough to make me pause. I put the letter down and looked at Laura, who was reading beside me. She asked if I wanted to go. I said I didn't know yet, because sometimes forgiveness isn't about who deserves it, but about whether you're ready to stop bleeding from the same wound. I just wasn't sure if I was ready yet. All week I kept staring at that letter from my mother sitting on the counter like a question I didn't want to answer. Laura said she would support whatever I chose, but she admitted she was nervous about me going. I understood why. Every encounter with my family seemed to end the same way, with me walking away feeling like I had failed a test that no one had explained the rules for. Still, part of me wondered if this invitation really was different. Maybe Mom had reached the point where even she couldn't hide behind excuses anymore. On Saturday afternoon, I finally decided to go. Laura came with me because she said she didn't trust my mother's idea of a family gathering to stay simple. As soon as we pulled up to the house, I could see extra cars parked along the street. That alone made my stomach tighten. I thought it would be a small dinner, maybe just Mom, Ryan, and me. Instead, the driveway looked like a reunion. When we walked in, the smell of food hit me first, followed by the sight of at least a dozen relatives scattered through the living room. My mother beamed like a hostess on opening night. She hugged me tightly and whispered that she wanted everyone to see the family healing together again. I could feel Laura tense beside me, but I forced a smile because starting a scene in front of my entire extended family wasn't going to help. Ryan was near the kitchen talking to one of our cousins. He looked uncomfortable too, which made me realize he probably hadn't known this was going to be a public spectacle either. When he saw me, he gave a small nod that said he was trying. That was enough to keep me in the room. Dinner started, and for the first half hour, everything seemed almost normal. People asked about my job, about the apartment, about the honeymoon Laura and I never really took. My mother kept glancing at Ryan and me as though expecting something magical to happen any minute. Then after dessert, she stood up and cleared her throat. I knew that sound. It was the sound of trouble wearing a polite smile. She thanked everyone for coming and started talking about how proud she was that our family could come together after so many difficult years. Then she began to cry softly, the kind of tears that demanded silence. She said she had made mistakes in the past, that she had let fear guide her instead of love. And then she turned toward me and Ryan and said she hoped we could finally forgive her and forgive each other. Ryan and I exchanged a look. Neither of us knew what to do. The room was quiet except for the sound of people shifting in their chairs. My mother reached for our hands, pulling us both to stand beside her. It felt like we were being placed in some family play with her as the director. She asked everyone to raise a glass to new beginnings. In that moment something inside me cracked open, but not in anger this time. I realized that for all her manipulation, all her guilt and denial, my mother wasn't some mastermind of cruelty. She was just a woman terrified of being forgotten. All those years of forcing connection were her way of fighting loneliness. It didn't excuse what she had done, but it made sense of it. After the toast, I stepped outside to breathe. The night was cool and quiet. Ryan followed me a few minutes later carrying 2 glasses of water. He didn't say anything at first. We stood there listening to the faint sound of laughter coming from inside. Then he said he never wanted things to happen the way they did, that he had been too cowardly to stop it. He said Mom's obsession with unity had always made him feel like the golden child, but that he knew now it was just another trap. I told him I didn't hate him anymore, but I didn't trust him completely either. He nodded and said that was fair. Then he said something I hadn't expected. He wanted to move out of the city and start fresh somewhere else. He said he'd been offered a job in another state and thought it might help to finally put distance between himself and Mom's influence. I told him maybe that was the best thing he could do. When we went back inside, my mother was wiping away tears and thanking everyone for coming. She looked at me with a mixture of pride and desperation, as if needing my approval to make her apology real. I hugged her, but it wasn't the kind of hug that promised everything would be fine. It was a quiet acknowledgement that maybe this was as close as we were ever going to get to peace. Later that night, when Laura and I drove home, the road felt strangely empty. She reached over and held my hand without saying anything. After a long stretch of silence, she asked if I believed my mother's apology. I told her I thought Mom meant it in the only way she knew how. That was enough for now. Back at home, I poured a drink and stared out the window, thinking about how forgiveness doesn't always look like reconciliation. Sometimes it's just the choice to stop letting someone's chaos dictate your peace. I thought about Ryan leaving town and about Mom sitting alone in that big house, and about how maybe letting go wasn't cruelty but mercy. Still, a small part of me wondered what she might do when she realized her sons were no longer orbiting around her. Because with my mother, nothing ever truly ended. And somewhere deep down, I knew the story wasn't finished yet. It's been a few months since that gathering at my mother's house, and life has finally quieted into something resembling normal. Ryan moved 2 states away just like he said he would, and for the first time in decades, the silence between us doesn't feel hostile. We text occasionally, short messages about work or weather or some random memory from childhood that sneaks up on one of us. There's no drama, no guilt, just a cautious civility that feels like peace. I've learned not to expect more than that, and honestly, I don't need more. Mom still calls, though far less often. Her tone has changed. The edge of manipulation is gone, replaced by something gentler, almost uncertain, as if she doesn't quite know how to speak without guilt as her native language. She asks about Laura, she asks about work, she even asks about therapy, which she has started on her own. When she first mentioned it, I nearly dropped the phone. She said her counselor told her that her fear of losing control was rooted in abandonment, and that she's learning to sit with silence instead of filling it with apologies. I didn't know what to say, so I just told her I was proud of her. I meant it. Laura and I finally took that postponed honeymoon, a quiet road trip through the mountains. The air up there felt cleaner, like it could rinse the noise from my head. We stayed in a small cabin overlooking a valley, and for the first time in a long while I slept through the night without dreams that left me tense. One evening we sat outside watching the fog settle over the trees, and Laura asked if I missed my brother. I thought about it for a while before answering. I told her I didn't miss who he was back then, but I missed who I thought he was before everything went wrong. She nodded as if she understood exactly what that meant. When we got back home, there was another letter from Mom waiting in the mailbox. This one was shorter, only a page. She thanked me for coming to the family dinner and said she knew she had hurt me, but that she was grateful I hadn't given up on her completely. She wrote that she was thinking about selling the house and moving somewhere smaller, maybe by the coast. She ended the note by saying she hoped that if she gave us all space, she might finally earn back the trust she had broken. Reading it, I realized she was finally doing the one thing she'd avoided her whole life letting go. I folded the letter carefully and put it in the drawer where I keep things that remind me how far I've come. Ryan's last message sits above it, a photo of his new apartment and a short caption saying he's finding his footing again. These days I've started to measure peace differently. It's not about pretending everything is fixed or pretending the past didn't happen. It's about waking up without that old heaviness in my chest. It's about walking through the day without rehearsing old arguments in my head. It's about being able to think of my brother and my mother without anger tightening my throat. Every now and then I drive by the old neighborhood where we grew up. The streets look smaller now, the trees taller than I remember. Sometimes I stop near the park where Ryan and I used to play and sit for a few minutes watching kids run across the field shouting and laughing like nothing could ever go wrong. I used to envy that kind of innocence, but now I see it differently. Growing up means learning that peace isn't the absence of pain, it's the ability to keep living with it and still choose kindness where bitterness could easily grow. Last week Mom called just to say goodnight. No hidden meaning, no emotional ambush. Just good night. Caught me off guard how simple it felt. After I hung up, Laura asked what she'd wanted and I said nothing at all, and that was the best part. Sometimes when I think back on everything, the betrayal, the lies, the years of silence, it still feels surreal that all of it began with one small act of trust broken so long ago. But what surprises me more is that the ending isn't anger or revenge or some dramatic reconciliation. It's quieter than that. It's just the slow settling of dust after a long storm. And as strange as it sounds, that quiet feels like a kind of grace. Because for the first time in my life, I can finally breathe without waiting for the next explosion. For the first time, I feel like my peace belongs to me.